Hi, thank you very much for joining me today for another episode of the Aviation Investor Club. I've got a guest with me today. His name is Russell Klein, and he's somebody that needs to be in your Rolodex. He's the person that people go to when they got things like to know about the FAA regulatory requirements and anything to do with like regulations. And he also has an expansive knowledge about the unmanned aerial vehicles or those sort of drone technologies, etc. So without me waffling on too much, I would like to introduce you then to Russell. If you could please introduce us in your own style and what we should know about you and how you got started, basically. Like, who is Russell Klein?
Thank you for having me. David, my name is Russell Klein. Right now, I kind of occupy two roles. I have do some consulting and advocacy work for clients, and then I am also the chief regulatory officer for DEXA, which is formerly Drone Express. And we are a newly minted Part 135 air carrier. So we've joined the ranks of Amazon Prime Air, Google Wing, Zipline, some of the other folks in that stratosphere of unmanned aviation. A lot of big happenings in the last 2 weeks there. But to answer your question, yeah, I've been in aviation really all my professional life. I think like most people who get bitten by the aviation bug, it happens young. And that was sitting in the back seat of a small 4-seater plane when my dad was taking flight lessons as a little kid, and always enamored with it. He led me eventually after college to DC, where I worked in Congress for a few years in the House Aviation Subcommittee. And then when my time there wrapped up, I moved over to the FAA for another few years as a congressional liaison. And I would like to say I used to be based in Congress. I used to call the FAA, and then I went to the FAA and put all the phone calls from Congress. So it was a natural move over, but it was a great position. I got a lot of high-level access and the decision-making level of the federal government, at least, to witness that and be a part of it. And then spent a few years doing lobbying, government affairs work, mostly aviation related. And then had the opportunity to be an operations manager for a commercial service airport here in Ohio, and did that for years as well. And then culminating lastly as the chief regulatory officer at Drone Express.
Okay, that's a really fascinating background. So, what drew you into the regulatory affairs specifically, and later into the business development within aviation? Because that's quite a niche scenario to get into, and it's very specific.
Yeah, so I'm not a pilot, and I think that's they tend to have a lot of folks that have a pilot background, and that's how they get into it. I was more interested in political science major in college, and more interested in policy work and legislation, how a government actually functions, and didn't want to go to law school. So I decided I'll go work at it to try and learn it from the inside out. Once you get into aviation, it's so heavily regulated that you can't avoid it. And so understanding that regulatory framework, how the rules are made, how they're put in place, it can be maddening at sometimes because there's thousands and thousands of pages of regulation, but knowing really how they impact operations, how you actually want to put something into place is pretty interesting. And so it can become a little philosophical at times, but it's never dull, I should say. There's always something new that's coming out or some way of interpreting something to your advantage.
Yep. So you've worked then at the FAA, you've worked as, I understand, an international airport, and now a drone logistics company. So how have these different environments shaped your understanding then of the aviation sector as a whole?
It's a good question. You learn it's a safety organization. You learn why everything exists, why the rules are there, what they're meant to accomplish, and how they're meant to shape the industry. And then as the airport, that was really where I got my first under the guise of all those regulations. And it's a lot more difficult than you might suspect. There's a lot of them. As many of the folks at FAA that I know are wonderful people, collectively, they don't have a sense of humor. And that's true of any safety organization. They're there to make sure that you're following the rules. And so it's that sort of, I'm drawing a blank on the word I want to use here, but it's just that interesting sort of caveat between trying to do it and working within the confines of it all, because they put up some pretty stout barriers, and there's a lot of room in there. There's not a lot of space between the letters of the regulation.
Exactly. So what are the key or some of the key lessons then that you've learned while serving as a congressional liaison at the FAA?
I'll have to think back on that. I think some of the biggest ones I learned is that while everything is regulated, there are humans and ultimately at that level that make the decisions. And you might get an interpretation of one regulation from one person. You go ask somebody else, you'll get a plate. And so knowing that it is ultimately fallible and it is ultimately driven by people, you really get an appreciation for how to best navigate that area. And I think as the key lesson would be, you know, there are rules here. It's a regulated industry, but there's a lot of space to try. There's a lot of technique involved that you can customize on your own. And don't be afraid necessarily of trying to do it the way that works best for you. There's not just one way to do that.
Yeah, exactly. As we say in England, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Exactly. Yep. I'm about to use that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, but the cat still dies, so maybe not good
That's
for
right.
safety.
Yeah. Shear sheep. How about that? We'll see sheep. One more little way to shear.
Exactly. So you're currently then working at Drone Express, as I understand. So in your current role, you're the chief regulatory officer, if I understand.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Sure.
so what's the main challenges then that you're like facing when it comes to FAA certifications? Because you know them quite well and those sort of things. So
Yeah.
what's the the main challenges there?
Yeah, the main challenges are that we've come up with is it's a lengthy process. It took us 18 months to go through it, and that's pretty quick for most certifications. Unfortunately, would have moved a little bit faster. It's a lengthy process. It takes some time to complete. You have to have you need a little bit of money to do it. It's not an inexpensive thing, and that really comes in the form of getting manuals written and then hiring a few key positions that are required by regulation to have in place. So you've got to find the right people that you want to be a part of that and you really pick that operation, bring it to life. And it requires, like I said, it's a lengthy process of patience. And starting an operation, and because as you go through the certification, you're ultimately going through it to eventually at the end of it to be able to operate. So you go through all this, you go through an enormous amount of work. And then at the end, you have to turn the operation. And so the joke among our group was the prize for the pie eating contest was more pie. And you've got to build this thing in a way so when you're done with it, it works. And it works on day zero of completing your certification and then saying, all right, we're going to go fly now. We're going to run an operation. And you've got to have it done properly enough that you're not standing there with your hands on your head going, oh my God, we forgot this critical thing. And we can't even comply with manuals. So it's intention, patience, like anything in the world. You need some funding to do it because nothing's for free. It doesn't cost you anything to go through it other than just completing all the work. But I guess is the best way to put it. And know that it's a process. Complete the process. It's just getting through it.
And for our listeners that don't already know who or what Drone Express is, could you give a small introduction to what the company is before I go on to other questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a drone delivery company, a logistics company at the heart of it. We are a startup. There's only about 25 people on the team right now, which is incredibly small. We were founded in 2019. Our CEO is a woman by the name of Beth Flippo, and she has been leading this effort for about 6 years. I myself came on board about 3 years ago to really manage all the FAA interactions that we were having. So that's us right now. We're based in Bloomington, Ohio, and we'll have our operations beginning in North Carolina here shortly.
Okay, that's very good. So how do you see then drone operations evolving within the commercial aviation over the next few years?
Yeah, so there's been an enormous amount of operations coming online for anybody that's been following it in the Dallas, Texas area and Fort Worth, all the major players, and that is generally considered to be Zipline, Amazon, and Wing, which is Google Wing. I'd say it's a subsidiary of Google or Alphabet. They've been really kind of working closely together down there in building, I think, the first, as I would call it, sandbox for put drone delivery at scale. So that's where you're starting to see all the major components of drone delivery come together with big operators. We, just by virtue of our size, haven't been down there, and we've been focusing on certifications last year and a half, 2 years. So it's been something we wanted to participate in, and I think we will soon. But those are where you see a lot of the activity right now. North Carolina is another location, which is where we'll be doing our first operation. And you're seeing some of the same players down there. UPS also has an unmanned air carrier called over, and they're in North Carolina as well. So there's a couple little pockets around the U.S. where you're starting to see it happen more.
Okay. So from your perspective then, so how important is the regulatory compliance when companies in the aviation space are considering like mergers, acquisitions, or doing even JVs together? How important is that?
In order to operate at all, and then especially in order to continue operating, you have to be compliant. Like you have to, the regulations are there. You have to be, if you kind of have a demonstrated history of not abiding by those rules, that can be a real problem and something from an investor standpoint that you would want to ask, like, how's your compliance? Do you have any histories of non-compliance, and what were the results of that? To give you an idea of the leadership of that company's attitude toward regulation, and aviation is probably one of those few industries that kind of crave it because A, it's been around for so long that they need the regulation, but B, at the end of the day, it's all about safety. And we all need to sing off the same song sheet, as it were, and understand that, the guy next to you is not going to do something that you wouldn't do, and vice versa. So understanding that from an investor standpoint is something you would definitely want to, a question you would want to ask, probably some research you'd want to do on your own. And it's if you find something that was wrong, that they should be discounted. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody might interpret something wrong. You're going to get something's going to go wrong one day. It's not about whether or not you had an accident or made a mistake. It's how you respond to it. And that's what the FAA in particular cares about, or any other civil aviation authority, in my opinion, is, we all know that you're going to violate the rules at some point, whether you meant to or not. How do you respond to it? What are your corrective actions? How does the company get back into the lane? Because inevitably, there's a day out there where you're going to have a bad day.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So are there any particular regulatory risks or opportunities with a big O that investors in the aviation sector should be aware of?
In the unmanned sector right now, it's not even uncertain. There's just, I think everybody's watching and waiting. It's still a very new industry. You've got a lot of early entrants, and they're big, with the exception of DEXA or German Express, they're all very large companies. And I think that's because right now it takes a lot of capital to do this. And you've never built it before, so there's a lot of third-party service. There's not a lot of third-party service folks that are supplying the industry yet. They're starting to come online. This is all brand new. We're still figuring it out as a group. So I would say it's just because it hasn't been around as long. You gotta be tolerant, probably a little more risk than you're used to. The benefit or the opportunity side is no one's claimed anything here yet. There's nothing. No one has market share. No one has anything along the lines of competing with Amazon right now for logistics or package delivery is probably a pretty hard thing to do. In drone delivery, it's not that case because they represent a big chunk of it, but it's still an overall and what the potential is in the future. It's a tiny fraction. So I think looking forward, you're going to have a lot of folks, a lot of companies come online, a lot of operators come into the mix, which is really going to benefit everybody. And there's some real opportunities to get in on those at the seed level, or even before that at that founder. There are some things that need to happen still. Is expecting, including some new flight rules that we expect to be published early next year, and a few other regulatory pieces that are coming online. But I expect 2026 to be a year of gelling, hopefully, where some forecast, the companies, we can forecast what the regulatory environment's going to look like, and the business environment will be built into that. And then the last thing is, because it's so early and because the FAA has appropriately asked industry to align themselves and say, okay, industry, you give us the standard and then we'll take it into account. We get to affect all those regulations still. They have not been set in stone. And so it's very malleable still at this point.
Okay, so what impact do you think then advancing drone technologies will have on traditional air logistics and like airport operations?
Yeah, I think you're actually going to start to see a pretty high level of integration of controlled airspace, which is where the airports are, the commercial service airports are. They all have very few exceptions. They all have controlled airspace around them. I think how that'll impact the integration, I don't think is going to be very difficult. We can integrate manned traffic quite easily. I don't think unmanned will be that much of a burden for the industry, but the integration of that and the impact it's going to have on logistics in particular is going to be pretty profound. The last mile delivery, or what is currently done by a courier in a car, if there's physical things that need to be. I'm reminded always of, I heard this a long time ago, the fax machine killed bike couriers in corporate America because all they were doing was riding a backpack full of paper back and forth. And now I'll just fax it. And I see that a little bit the same way, where depending on the application, whether it be medical or commercial delivery or even construction delivery, those need it right now, just in time deliveries of a lot of smaller goods, but still things that are physical, things that you can't be digitized and sent, can be accomplished with a drone. You don't have to fight city traffic, but you take out all the congestion. And then even at the residential level, delivery trucks coming off the street and being replaced by drones, placing congested items in people's front yards and backyards or anywhere else.
Okay. You're having to be involved, or you have been involved in both government and the private sector. So what advice would you then offer to entrepreneurs entering the aviation space today?
Don't be afraid of the government. You can't not interact with the government in aviation. I don't think there's no real privatized aviation system in the world, and some of these are pretty big government that's put in there. Again, I think it would be say, this is what I want to do. Have a relationship there. If they understand who you are and how you operate and what you want to do, you're likely to get a lot more understanding out what it is you need to do. And you'll also get more understanding out of them because they're people. And they'll have that, oh, okay, I get it. This is your end state. This is what you're going for. This is what you want it to be. So now I understand why you're approaching it this way. Showing up fully formed on their doorsteps day one, they're going to take a big step back and, whoa, I've never heard of you. I don't know who you are. I don't understand entirely what you're trying to do. So can you walk me through it? And then you've got to, as a person or a company, you've got to take a big step back and then tell your story that, where you came from. And so there's a real benefit to starting out. You don't need to ask anything of them unless they think there's anything you need. You don't need their permission to try and go and do it. But you have a work relationship with. They will be, I've seen it firsthand. They will be a cheerleader and an advocate for you if they know you, and you have good intentions, and you have some integrity. I mean, it doesn't take much more than that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So what regulatory trends then should aviation startups be paying close attention to?
Yeah, and the trends right now in the unmanned world we're really looking for, as an industry, we need to start working together and partnering. And we're starting to see that. I mentioned earlier the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You've got operators starting to share information with one another and integrate together, because that's really what, at the end of the day, I think the FAA is concerned about is we could have 100,000 of these drones in 3 years flying around. How do we know that they're not going to run in? So working with one another, I think you're going to start to see some, I wouldn't call it consolidation in terms of acquisition, but I think you're going to start to see a lot of companies, hey, we need to work on our UTM, our unmanned traffic management system. Let's go find 3 other operators to do that so we can all put in and help build this thing. I think you're going to see I think you see a lot of third-party service folks get into the industry a lot more, which would be something like detect and avoid solutions, flight management software solutions. This is very different from manned air aviation in terms of the sheer number of aircraft that could be in the air at once. And I think you're also going to see, it's not so much an industry, I guess it is a trend, is airplanes have to have an airport to land, to take off from and to land at. Drones, you need a parking space in a parking lot. And so I think you're going to start to see a lot of the drone companies, and ourselves included, really start to integrate themselves into local communities and let them know that we're going to start spreading the word that we're here, this is doing. We've got these great services that we can offer to you, and sort of really socialize drone delivery. It was, it wasn't uncommon in the 1920s for people to run outside and look at the airplane flying. Now no one even looks up anymore. We're still, 100 years later, where people stop and look at the drone flying. I think in 5 years or less, people aren't going to really have seen it. It's just another airplane. There's pitfalls in there if you don't do it right.
Yeah, for sure. So are there any recent projects or milestones then at Drone Express that you're particularly proud of and would like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the Part 135 certification, which is in the world of commercial aviation, there's the Part 121 carriers, which are your major airlines, your Deltas, your Lufthansa, your British Airways, American Airlines. And then there's 135, and 135 is a on-demand air travel. So they've got jets or Magellan jets. Or like airlines, they have to have robust policy procedures in place. And we wrote 1,059 pages of manuals just to be able to demonstrate our compliance. So it's a big undertaking. But we achieved that same level of safety, really, and accomplishment as someone who would, lease a Gulfstream 500 to someone to go to fly them wherever they need to go to. So huge accomplishment on that. We're the 7th company to do that. A part of that was we had to certify our drone. We make our own aircraft, which is a little uncommon. And so we took it through, it was a couple of years of development, and then we took it through a very robust airworthiness demonstration test, for lack of a better term. And so our aircraft made that list, was fully compliant and certified. So those are the two big things that we've spent the last, like I said, year and a half really working on. And those have been the most notable achievements as of late. And we're now at the same level as, like I said, Amazon Prime Air and the Black and the others.
That's very cool. Very cool. So what are the key takeaways you'd like our audience, particularly the investors and aviation entrepreneurs, to remember from today's conversation?
I would say keep an eye, selfishly, on drone delivery. It's definitely going to be the next iteration of aviation abolition. A lot of adjectives in that, but they have an endless application, and you're starting to see two things happen. The industry is really starting to invest in it. You're starting to see a lot of third-party services, like I said earlier, come into it. But you're also starting to see the civil aviation authorities no longer holding it off with two hands. They held it off with two hands for quite a while. When I worked in Congress back in 2007, it was I helped write an aviation reauthorization bill. And that was the first time we actually put unmanned aerial system into United States code. So it's almost 20 years ago that this occurred, and at least in the US, the FAA was very cautious, very resistant, which kind of kept the industry at bay. But now the industry's, there's enough pressure behind them that they finally said, okay, we're going to put this forward. Europe's ahead of us on it. They have been for a few years now. I don't see industry over there necessarily in the same way I've seen it here in terms of the investment that's going on, but it's very early on. Remarkably, in the next 24 months, I think you're going to start to see a lot of the necessary pieces come into play, and so you're going to see a lot more entrants.
Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting sort of foresight you have. So, if you could change one thing about the regulatory landscape in aviation today, what would it be?
Okay, this is detailed. complex. In the U.S., as an air carrier, we have to comply with NEPA, which is our National Environmental Policy Act. Among many other things, it created the EPA, but it also said, okay, government, anytime you take an action that could impact the environment, you have to make an evaluation of how it could do that, which I fully support. Don't have any issue with that. It applied to air carriers because for the longest time, they had and they still do have an environmental impact, whether it be emissions or noise, or if you're building an airport or anything. So you have to go through a very long environmental assessment phase. Drones are almost all electrically powered, are very quiet, and have minimal impact on the environment. It's almost, you can just say it can be accepted as a premise. So I would say, okay, drones need to be categorically excluded from DEPA for their operations. 1,000 of them over your house at one time is no good. That's never going to happen. But you're not going to notice a couple that fly around it. And it's a years long process. It's very expensive to go through. And it's a barrier for these drones to come into communities and provide their service and shitty operators. So there's a couple. So I would very delicately reach in and just pull that one out and say, you're good to go. Make sure you talk to the people that where you're going to be operating, let them know you're there. But from a government standpoint, and the FAA is doing a lot to do, but I don't know what the regulatory requirement is in Europe or elsewhere. But here, that one is they're frustrating and slow, but necessary component.
Yep. It makes a lot of sense. And you explained it right perfectly. So even to a neophyte like myself, thinking that made a lot of sense, sort of thing. So I definitely do support you there. So where can our listeners then connect or contact you when they're with you when you're online, or if they'd like to learn more about you or even reach out to you? How would you like the listeners to contact you?
I'll provide my email address for anyone who wants to reach out directly. I have a LinkedIn profile. If you search Russell Klein and Drone Express, hopefully there's not more than one of you there. And then I can also have a WhatsApp, so I would be happy to share that contact information to take phone calls or emails, or if LinkedIn's great. I'm on there almost every day, so it's a pretty useful tool that I enjoy keeping in touch with and making new connections on.
Perfect. And as we're closing out now, is there any sort of, without a question, is there any words of wisdom or anything you would like to convey, your own thoughts or original thoughts, whatever, for the day that you'd like to just say, this is this is how you would like to end the interview?
Some of my experiences and educational, if nothing else. But yeah, I would say aviation's a lot of longevity to it. And I think for a long time, it stalled a little bit in commercial air service. You think we're really now on this verge of becoming a little more, I don't want to say democratized, but you're going to start seeing it impact you, on a positive way here very soon. So keep an eye out, keep an ear to the ground. And if you're interested in it from an industry standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity.
Perfect. So thanks very much, everybody, for listening to our current episode from the Aviation Investor Club. We're going to have another one coming next week, and we got another extraordinary guest. There's a wealth of information coming as well. So thanks very much, everybody, for listening. Thank you from me, and over to you, Ross.
Thank you. Appreciated being here, and look forward to meeting some of the fine folks over there in the near future.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Bye. And now I have to close